This week, no more fat troops. The Secretary of War unleashes new fitness standards for the military. Who's winning the messaging war on the government shutdown? And the Guinness World Record for digital streaming has been set. The panel reacts. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on the Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of the Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now let's meet our panel, the men and women behind the stories you read at readlion.com. Michael Ryan is our executive editor, Michaela S. Truth, and Adam Wittenberg, great staff writers, the both of them, at readlion.com. Team, it's good to be with you again this week. Let's dive right in. And Adam, we start with you. You know, we were all just out at the great award ceremony we have every year for the Teachers of the Year at the Great Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. But there were some people that mentioned to me they noticed some distinctly hostile materials inside certain halls of the Smithsonian toward President Trump.
Yeah, well, think about it. You go to the nation's capital to see the nation's history and our archives and all these great cultural things, and yet you're being hit with political propaganda and even trying to redefine America. And that's what our reporter, Maggie Little, wrote an excellent piece I highly recommend about what's going on at the Smithsonian and trying to reframe America's founding and America's history from something that's overall quite good into something completely negative and otherwise, and Donald Trump is pushing back and saying no more.
Yeah, Michaela, is it correct to do that? I mean, I know people get wound up whenever President Trump talks about trying to control history. That was the way it was spun by a lot of people who are his critic. I would think if he were here, he would say he's just trying to get a fair picture of history painted here.
Oh, absolutely. I think he's being completely fair and trying to, as a history major, I mean, I studied both the dark parts of history and the good parts of history, and to go to the nation's capital at the Smithsonian and have them characterize our history as completely racist and full of hate and just white supremacy is completely counter to what the founders were intending and anything that you should be reading in accurate history reporting.
Michael, I don't know how much time you spent in the hallways of the Smithsonian. As I said, I popped into one or two. I talked with a colleague of ours who said they went in to see, I think it was the Natural History Museum, and they thought it outright hostile to President Trump.
Yeah, actually, the Lion's managing editor, Josh Mann, and I visited the American History Museum a few years ago, and we were really taken aback by the anti-American tone of things in there, as our reporter Maggie was just last week or so. And my wife also, on a previous trip, had spent about 10 minutes inside the Museum of History, American history, and just was disgusted, left after 10 minutes, and said, where'd all the neat stuff go? You know, we need to acknowledge the country's historical warts, and none bigger than slavery and segregation. But there's a danger in overdoing it. That's how history can be erased from a country. Communists love to take advantage of that. That's how countries destroy themselves. Let's not go there.
Michael, I want to stay with you. You wrote an op-ed, and you can find this, again, at readlion.com. It's great stuff, not only great journalism, but great opinion work, too. And you authored one about what's going on at present with the crackdown on illegal aliens in various cities, and the Democrats forcefully pushing back.
Yeah. The uniforms are pinstripes, not camouflage, the battlefields being courtrooms and hillsides, but there's a war on for control of this country. I wrote that for a different publication in 2018, and it seems to be coming true now. A reader at the time scolded me for using the war metaphor, but you have basically anarchists fighting with the government in the streets in various cities in this country. It's not organic, it's not out of nowhere. These are well-funded, well-equipped soldiers, albeit sad sack ones. But no one is saying this. No one is talking about the fact that this is a war between the two parties. Basically, the Democrats imported tens of millions of immigrants, illegal immigrants, over the last 4 years, with the express intent, no doubt, to have it as a voter base. And Republicans are now having to clean up after that and deport many criminal illegal aliens who actually were sprinkled in the invasion. That's what's going on here.
And as we continue to see, I guess I just broaden out the conversation for a second. Michaela, do you think still at this hour, based on polling I'm seeing, the American people still seem like they look at the actions of the Trump administration and the crackdown on illegals and the crime in certain big cities. The public still seems to support what the administration is doing.
I think definitely. I think especially with the rise in crime, as all linked to illegal immigrants, I shouldn't say all, but a lot in the past several months, is making the American public just aware of what the Trump administration is trying to do and that it's good for our country to preserve and protect its citizens.
Adam, back to you at readline.com. A story about teacher training seen as a missing link in the expansion of school choice. This is one of those things that at the Herzog Foundation we talk a lot about, obviously, is training up teachers for Christian education. Homeschoolers, we've got resources for that, too, at the Herzog Foundation website. So I know it's important to homeschoolers who take that upon themselves, Christian schools, but I suppose this training applies to all teachers. It's tough to even find good teachers these days, it seems.
Yeah, well, that's part of the issue. We cover here at The Line all the time the growth of school choice, micro schools, homeschooling. All kinds of new schooling options are emerging and growing and will continue to grow. But this story looks at the supply side. Sure, we can open new schools, but who is going to staff them? Who is going to teach them? And this report looked at the types of schools of education that train teachers and just how liberal, how woke, how crazy leftist they are. They're not even teaching people how to teach anymore. Most of the curriculum is well balanced toward social and political things and not even toward how to run a classroom. And so this gentleman that I kind of wrote about what he was researching is saying we need to correct that. We need to both change how these schools train teachers and also open alternative streams that will teach teachers to actually teach so they can work in all of these new and emerging schools.
I don't know, Michael, but it seems to me that just about any school that teaches teachers today, you'll find activism. I don't know how many pure education-based institutions there are out there for teachers.
Yeah, it's kind of like wokeism concentrate. There were a couple of really good quotes in Adam's story. One, the most assigned books and essays for prospective teachers are a heavy mixture of race essentialism, gender theory, and outright Marxist kookery. Meanwhile, this person says, these young aspiring teachers are learning, quote, Marxist praxis and gender as a performative act, but little of classroom management, curricular sequencing, or instructional practice. It seems that conservatives and Christians may need to have their own schools of education.
Michaela, we turn to you on the death of Charlie Kirk. This has now been a few weeks the country's had to reflect on it. There's still been a tremendous amount of outpouring of grief, obviously. I think the organization, Turning Point, that he founded is still trying to find its way. They've named his wife, Erica, the new CEO. They certainly have not peeled back on their presence. They've already hit college campuses with various high-profile folks. His radio show continues with high-profile guest hosts. You write a bit about the continued mission there as well since Charlie.
Yes, so it's really encouraging to see his impact just continue to spread all across America. But I especially talked about Center for Christian Virtue, which is a public policy Christian organization in Columbus, Ohio. And Charlie Kirk was scheduled to speak at their upcoming gala at the end of September, just less than 2 weeks right after his assassination. And so they had Ali Beth Stuckey come and his pastor come, and it was a great night that they said honoring his memory, but also continuing to talk about one of the most prevalent issues in our time, which is the importance of marriage and family. And that was a key focus of Charlie and something that we see Erica now turning to, and something that I'm curious to see how Erica will turn and encourage the young women, as Charlie was a voice to the young men. So maybe we'll see that discrepancy that we've been talking about and noticing start to end that gap because of Erica and because of Charlie.
I have wondered that. I think we might have talked about it last week. Michael, do you think much about the way young women in the country seem to be trending pretty hard left politically? At least the data suggests that's true. Young men, maybe not so much. I wonder if someone like Erica Kirk might help speak into that.
Absolutely. I mean, she may be the right person at the right time to do that. I just love the fact that there is a Center for Christian Virtue. It's just an exciting thing to me. Think about, when was the last time you heard virtue, the word virtue, or the concept of virtue being talked about in the public square. When was the last time? When was the last time they talked about it in the schools? Our founders were obsessed with virtue because they knew that was the key to a self-governing nation, is virtue. We're talking about self-control, selflessness, industry, honesty and integrity. If you teach nothing else in school, teach virtue.
Adam, the final story we're going to focus on today, the streaming platforms out there that everyone's fighting, for a piece of the revenue and fighting for audience and fighting for eyeballs. It's a wild west of media choices out there now. So when you get a hit on your hands, when you get a bona fide success like you write about, it's a winner. And it's harder to do these days, so that speaks even more highly about what you wrote.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is perfect timing because we're covering this week how people are fleeing Netflix over the woke LGBT agenda in children's programming. And they're doing it incessantly, folks. If you haven't checked this out, and especially if you have kids, please look into it. It is disturbing. But here's some good news. Here's something to counter that. The Chosen is the most streamed and the most translated now. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records into the most languages in history for a series. And this is, of course, based on the life of Jesus. I think they're up to season 5. And this is reaching people, telling stories from the Bible, and igniting interest in faith. And what a perfect time.
It wasn't that long ago, Michael. I've been in media now for 25 years, and it wasn't even 10 years ago that I think conventional wisdom was Christian programming or faith-based programming couldn't be mainstream. There just wasn't an audience for it. Was that never true, or is it just now more so not true?
I think that Christian media, especially in movies, had to really have a childhood before it could really get up and run, which it is now. I mean, it is kicking it in the movie theaters. In terms of The Chosen, it's become a global phenomenon. Especially through streaming. My wife and I alone probably put it over the goal line at the Guinness Book of World Records for binging the first 4 seasons alone. They need to keep it coming, though, because The Chosen is just one drop of wine in an ocean of media that is really filling people's heads with nothing except nothingness.
Michaela, in the changing media landscape, you being one of the youngest members here of the panel, how do you think young people are consuming media these days when you look at the numbers for The Chosen? Are they behind that, or is this an older crowd? How do you read it?
No, I think it's definitely appealing to the younger crowd. I remember it becoming extremely popular during COVID because I think the timing was around that year 2020 was when that season first came out. And so lots of young people that I was talking to were binging that show, in Michael's words, because it was encouraging and it was filled with hope. I will say, as Michael was saying, that all other media is nothingness, and that's true. And it's really discouraging to see my generation, especially, consuming a ton of content that is ungodly, honestly filled with just sexual immorality. And so seeing this story about The Chosen being in the Guinness Book of World Records is extremely encouraging.
Panel, thank you. That'll do it for this portion of the show. Now, when we return, we always like to take a look at what's going on out there in politics, on Capitol Hill, in cable news, the sights and sounds from this past week, when we return on the Lion Week in Review. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review, back with our panel, Adam, Michaela, and Michael. Panel, the week has been interesting in that we are, as we record this, in the middle of a government shutdown. Now, by the time people watch and or consume this, maybe we won't be, who knows for sure. But the messaging on it has been fascinating. I know you'll continue to follow it and read it at readlion.com, but let's turn to some of the happenings this week. JD Vance, after a meeting with House and Senate leadership on the Democrat side, stepped forward to say we're going to have a shutdown because, well, he explains.
We have disagreements about health care policy, but you don't shut the government down. You don't use your policy disagreements as leverage to not pay our troops, to not have essential services of government actually function. You don't say the fact that you disagree about a particular tax provision is an excuse for shutting down the people's government and all the essential services that come along with it. If you look at what Chuck Schumer has said in the past consistently, it's whatever our disagreements are, let's negotiate with them, let's talk about them, let's figure out a bipartisan solution, but you don't shut the government down. In other words, you don't put a gun to the American people's head and say, unless you do exactly what Senate and House Democrats want you to do, we're going to shut down your government. That's exactly what they're proposing out there. Now, we have to remember, they're very frustrated. They say that they're very frustrated about the fact that this negotiation has not taken place until today. But if you look at the original thing they did with this negotiation, it was a $1.5 trillion spending package, basically saying to the American people, we want to give massive amounts of money, hundreds of billions of dollars to illegal aliens for their health care, while Americans are struggling to pay their health care bills. That was their initial foray into this negotiation. We thought it was absurd. We told them it was absurd, and now they come in here saying that if you don't give us everything that we want, we're going to shut down the government. We think that's preposterous. We think it's totally unacceptable, and we think the American people are going to suffer because these guys won't do the right thing.
Now, this was an interesting point of discussion with the Democrats because this funding for illegal alien health care, Michael, was something that they stridently deny, and I'll play for you in a minute Hakeem Jeffries' response to it. But what's amazing is in the denial, you started to see people making memes on social media, putting sombreros on Hakeem Jeffries' head. And the more angry Democrats and more animated Democrats got about this charge that they wanted to fund illegal alien health care, more memes were made, and the president himself even started posting it on his Truth Social account. So, Michael, I must say, I don't typically see Republicans on the winning end of a message, but it seems like they are on this one.
Well, I think so. Historically, the Democrats and the media have done a great job of blaming Republicans for any shutdown, but that's not going to be possible this time around. As JD Vance also pointed out, the Republicans in this case voted to keep the government open, and it's the Democrats that voted not to. But I think it's really rich for Democrat leaders to be all this upset at Trump mocking them after what they did to him, which was they framed him as a Russian asset. They threw all kinds of lawfare at him. They tried to bankrupt him, imprison him, keep him off the ballot, and now they're upset that he's making fun of them. Come on.
Adam, this is an interesting exchange. Hakeem Jeffries, who has really been ticked off this week because of all the memes going around about him with the Mexican hat and the mustache and the whole thing, he goes on CNN with Jake Tapper to argue this point that they want to fund illegal alien health care. But even Jake Tapper in this exchange is forced to acknowledge that's exactly what they've done. Take a listen.
So let me ask you about a provision that the Republicans are talking about quite a bit. I know you want to talk about, and Democrats want to talk about, extending the Obamacare subsidies, which expire at the end of 2025. But they talk about the provisions, and it's right here, subtitle E, and this has to do with the repeal of health care subtitle changes, and specifically what it is. How they characterize it is you want to give health insurance to undocumented immigrants. I understand that's not really an accurate depiction, but what it does do is...
It's a lie.
It's a lie, but what you support does bring back funding for emergency Medicaid to hospitals, some of which does pay for undocumented immigrants and people who don't have health insurance. And also there is this provision, and it's not about undocumented immigrants, it's about people with asylum seekers and people with temporary protected status, et cetera, but about their ability to get Medicaid. So they're non-citizens, they're not undocumented, they're not illegal. Why even include that in a bill knowing that they're going to seize right upon that and use that to message?
So, Adam, it's a lie, but did you catch that?
Yeah. Yeah, the devil's in the details there, and this time the details are being exposed. So, don't believe for a second that the Democrats are pulling back from their support. I mean, they loved what happened under Biden, throwing open the border, flying illegal immigrants into the country, giving them housing, giving them health care. American citizens, wake up. The Democrat establishment, it doesn't like you. It wants to replace you. It wants to. And And these Democrats, they know exactly what they're doing, and that's why they're not willing to compromise. They're not willing to go with what the majority of Americans voted for by saying, yes, we want Donald Trump because he will close the border, he will end this madness, and the Democrats have not changed. Don't believe anything else they say.
Michaela, I think the American public is pretty smart. I mean, it's not hard to decipher that gaslighting. Well, it's a lie, but it's actually in there.
No, I definitely agree, and I would just encourage the American public to, as things shut down, planes and flights are slower, they're reporting, and this government shutdown does impact every single American citizen, but I'd encourage those citizens to endure it and say, we're glad that we have a Congress who is sticking firm and pushing back against these Democrats and saying, no, we're not going to compromise to these illegal immigrants and fund trillions and trillions of dollars to them, because a few days of delays is much better than giving trillions of dollars to illegal immigrants.
We'll see how this plays out. The Democrats are clearly feeling the pressure at the moment, so maybe that will change by week's end. We'll see. As we shoot this right now, we're in the middle of the government shutdown, so we'll continue to watch it at readline.com. Pete Hegseth was also the story of the week as he convened a meeting of the top military brass at Quantico. Flew them in from all over the world to sit before him, and he laid out his new expectations for military leadership. Listen.
It's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look. It is bad, and it's not who we are. So whether you're an airborne ranger or a chairborne ranger, a brand new private or a 4-star general, you need to meet the height and weight standards and pass your PT test. And as the chairman said, yes, there is no PT test. But today, at my direction, every member of the Joint Force at every rank is required to take a PT test twice a year, as well as meet height and weight requirements twice a year, every year of service. This administration has done a great deal from day one to remove the social justice, politically correct, and toxic ideological garbage that had infected our department, to rip out the politics. No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. No more climate change worship. No more division, distraction, or gender delusions. No more debris. As I've said before, and will say again, we are done with that.
Michael, I couldn't help. Those watching might notice the big American flag behind the Secretary of War there. It felt very much like a George C. Scott as Patton moment, didn't it?
It did. It did. Almost a Dean Wormer moment where, he said, fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son. All over X, I see veterans just delighted with this move. I talked to an Iraq veteran myself who was just thrilled with this move. It's something that the civilian law enforcement agencies ought to consider doing. And in terms of dudes in dresses, it sounds like an organization that needs to happen.
And by the way, Michaela, I spoke with some women who served equally. There was no exception taken, at least to the women that I spoke to, who rose in the ranks of the military. This was equally well received by women.
Oh, most definitely. I think it's extremely important that we have military members who are strong and fit and able to defend our country. And that's not sexual discrimination. It's sexual discrimination. It's actually just protection. And so women can meet those standards. It's not discriminating against them. It's actually calling them to meet those standards so that we can have a nation that is defended well, because we have strong men and women at those front lines.
By the way, Adam, you and I would not be welcome under Pete's new metrics. He said no more beards and haircuts aplenty.
Ooh, well, very scary. But I guess I won't be signing up.
But, I mean, it's, these standards have been lacking. And from what I understand, everything from weight to guys with man buns, that's no longer welcome on the bases.
Yeah. Well, I think you think about what is the military there to do? They're there to win wars. They're there to fight battles. And this whole dress code, the whole standards, it's to ensure strength. It's also to ensure not distractions. I didn't always have this beard. I mean, there was a time I could have passed the standards. But now I do stand out and I look different, and, people might notice me more. Well, when you're in the military, that's not a good thing. You need to just have, that you and the next guy or next gal, whatever, need to be fighting getting together, aligned together, not distracted by someone's style, someone's dress, someone's weight. And so I'm glad he's calling them back to what they've always historically been. How did we win World War II and World War I for that matter? We had those standards and we need them again.
There are still people out there, panel, that in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination still seem to be engaged in rhetoric that I find kind of dumbfounding. Here's Rosie O'Donnell on MSNBC this week.
When people say, I changed my mind, we have to say, welcome back to reality. Let's all be Americans together, right? Because what's happening is not only happening to Democrats, it's happening to everyone. And when the Medicaid cuts go in, old people are going to start to die. To die. What he's done yet hasn't even hit us yet. Right. And if he's not stopped now, we have lost our country. And I don't know, Nicole, how it is that some people cannot see it. My therapist said, why are you so upset? And I said to her, why are you not?
Old people are going to die if he's not stopped. Michael?
Wow. I guess there's a lot of people that should be worried then. She talks about reality. She's not living in reality. She's not even living in the United States, as far as I know. And then, Kimmel and company are joining forces like an axis of comedic evil. And they're making it sound like Trump is worse than Hitler. These people are toxic to the body politic. They are poison to the political discussion in this country, and they need to be marginalized.
Well, at least she's admitted she's going to seek a therapist, at any rate. Panel, thank you. When we return, as we do each week, as we approach our 250th anniversary as a country, it's Faith and Freedom 250 as the Lion Week in Review returns.
Welcome to Faith and Freedom 250, a special series from the Herzog Foundation. We're telling the story of America's Christian heritage and how it has shaped and at times been challenged throughout our nation's history. Today, we look at the rise of public schools in America and when and why they began to turn secular.
In colonial and early America, it is well documented that churches and religious groups started the very first schools. Their goal, to teach literacy and instill moral values with the Bible as the central textbook. Many of these same groups went on to found colleges, training ministers to shepherd their communities. One of the earliest laws enacted during the Articles of Confederation, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, tied religion and education together. It stated religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and schools shall forever be encouraged. For the founding generation, this was the educational foundation. But by the early 19th century, society was changing and a new kind of school was emerging.
The nation's movement westward was accompanied by growth in urban areas. As hamlets and villages turned into towns and cities with larger populations, they lost their homogeneous character. Cities attracted a variety of cultures and religious groups from the countryside. They also grew quickly as immigration from Europe increased. This resulted in students from different faiths seeking an education in America. At the same time, as members of the Revolutionary War generation faded from memory, a desire arose to teach not only moral and religious lessons to the youth of the nation, but also to include the ideals of our republic to them. In his tour of the United States in 1824 and 1825, the Marquis de Lafayette noted that education was essential to understanding the rights and responsibilities of members of a free society in America. As an outsider looking into the nation, he recognized that education played a critical role in nation building. The Common School movement was amongst the first efforts on a large scale to remake the education system in the young nation. Beginning in 1830, led by Horace Mann in Massachusetts, common schools found substantial support in urban areas. Mann believed that the responsibility of providing education to young people fell to the state, and not to individual religious groups, as has been the model for nearly 200 years. He also advocated that education in America should be universal and free. His views still included the need to instill moral teachings to students. The Bible was used, but without an emphasis on doctrinal differences. The moral teachings were non-sectarian in nature, encouraging the breadth of Protestant beliefs. In 1846, Mann declared, quote, "We believe that the Bible should be read in our schools, not to dogmatize the pupils with sectarian opinions, but to strengthen and expand their moral sentiments," end quote.
Mann also saw common schools as places where students could learn their civic duties through education about the American system of government. In 1848, he called them the greatest discovery ever made by man. It does not serve sect or class or party, but pens a fair field and starts the race of life even. The model spread quickly. Standardized education offered free of charge to all classes appealed to many with few or no resources. Immigrant populations were drawn to common schools, even though many of the teachings contradicted their religious beliefs. Meanwhile, a broad interpretation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause began influencing education policy. The text is well known. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Originally intended to prevent a state-sponsored religion and religious tests for office, it was later used to argue against any religious influence in public schools. The often cited wall of separation between church and state did not originate from any of our founding documents, but from a letter Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802.
That interpretation fueled a series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions in the 20th century that supported secular education over religious education. In Everson v. Board of Education, 1947, the court applied the Establishment Clause to state and locally funded schools, virtually ending any state financial support of religious schools. In Engel v. Vitale, 1962, prayer was banned in public schools, even non-denominational prayer. The following year, Abington School District v. Shemp ended Bible reading and reciting the Lord's Prayer in public school classrooms. The court's reasoning was consistent. Public schools are government entities funded by taxpayers and therefore cannot promote religion. These decisions widened the divide between secular and religious education in this nation.
During the 20th century, more and more public schools began presenting themselves as neutral spaces void of any religious influence in a culturally diverse society. Educational institutions became places where religion was ignored more than celebrated or embraced. Education based upon natural law rather than creation theory also took root in secular schools. The thought of teaching both theories and letting the families of students form their own opinions was also shunned.
As with every action, an opposite reaction often results. Since the 1970s, a pendulum swing has occurred in the United States. Many Americans have turned back toward Christian education and homeschooling. Disappointment in public school quality has driven a renewed interest in private faith-based options. This new chapter in American education is still being written, and it's one that may again reshape the nation's future.
For nearly 250 years, America's schools have reflected, and sometimes resisted, the values that shaped our nation. At the Herzog Foundation, we believe Christian education is essential to preserving those values for generations to come. Join us next time on Faith and Freedom 250 as we continue telling the story of America's Christian heritage.